very lonely.
And I was really struggling, but I just didn't know why.
I felt kind of lost.
I felt kind of misplaced almost.
It was an autistic boy chasing neurotypicals who were running away from him.
For years before my diagnosis, I felt similar ways, like an imposter in my classes, confused and lonely. 20% of people are neurodiverse, meaning that up to 1 in 5 of your peers could be feeling similar ways, whether they are diagnosed or not. If this is the case, I'm wondering why we don't talk about it more. Why does so much stigma exist around neurodiversity? Hi, my name is Ivy Kyler. I'm a senior in high school and I have dyslexia and an attention deficit.
Hi, my name is Alex. I have ADHD.
I'm Raya. My diagnosis is ADHD and dyslexia, as well as some auditory processing disorders.
I'm Sav. I have ADD and dysgraphia.
My name is Alexa Loomis and I have dyslexia.
My name is Ryan. I have autism, ADHD, and anxiety.
Through exploring my passion for neurodiversity, I found that most people don't even know what it is. To be honest, the word neurodiversity does have so many definitions and nuances, but it's important that there's a general awareness on what it means.
I define neurodiversity as the differences and similarities in the way that people think and process.
A set of neurological differences distinct enough from the average neurotype, and everyone has their own unique neurotype, everyone's unique, but certain neurotypes, certain ways of thinking that are unique enough to deserve its own distinction.
Attentional disorders and learning disorders, and even things like dysgraphia, OCD, and Tourette's, which can interfere with learning even if they're not technically learning differences.
Everyone's brains work differently. I think neurodiversity is recognizing that it's okay for brains to work differently, and that's very normal.
Everyone's brain has things it's really good at and things it works hard at. That is human nature. It moves away from this notion of there's normal and there's abnormal.
By nature of the word really just means the differences in the way people think.
Anybody who doesn't think in a straight line.
I see neurodiversity very much as a difference, not a disability.
I've always had a complicated relationship with the library. As a kid, it was a world of storytelling and adventure, but also the place where I faced a constant struggle to understand the words on the page. When it came time for reading in lower school, I would sit staring at a book and pretend to read. I was so confused as to what I was doing wrong and why I couldn't do what all my peers were doing.
A lot of my childhood and early teenage years was a lot of oh, am I supposed to be doing this? Where should I be with this thing? My first day of kindergarten, I was on the playground and everybody's kind of going around doing their thing, and I'm I'm not sure I'm doing this right. Something here is wrong. Second grade, third grade, there were all of these little experiences where I'm there's definitely a challenge here, but I don't really know what to do about it. I spent a whole lot of time in my head. I would blink and 10 minutes had gone by and I'd have no idea what happened. I had a really difficult time just knowing how to balance the words on the page. I often skipped whole paragraphs when I read. The real issue was in my friendships and stuff where I was able to communicate with people, but there was always some sort of disconnect. My parents would see me come home and I would just melt down. I would just lose it because I was trying to keep everything together at school, right? So in my head, a running thought was, this is going to be a problem later. I don't know what to do about it, and so I just keep on going.
I was a super go kid. I always wanted to be doing something. I was constantly trying to figure out what the next thing I could be doing. I was into every sport freaking possible, never wanted to sit still. And then when I started to go to school, I always felt my brain worked a little bit differently, not in a bad way, but it would just take me a second longer to think of things. It was harder for me to participate in class, even though I really wanted to. When you're in a classroom setting and a teacher asks a question, the immediate response is for everyone to put their hands up. The problem was that I wasn't ready to answer that question that quickly. Basically felt like I was drowning in work. Was confused in all my classes, didn't know what to do. I knew it wasn't really a me problem, but couldn't really point a finger at what it was. It was causing anxiety that I just couldn't control. And I felt like no one really understood. Finally, COVID hits and being okay, I finally have this testing appointment. I remember just sitting down with my parents and we were okay, we're in the midst of COVID, your appointment will probably get canceled, and just being so frustrated. And then being okay, what the heck am I gonna do?
I had a pretty rough start of my schooling experience. During class, I would look at the board and I was just really confused. And I wasn't really good at expressing my confusion towards people. So I just kind of kept it in for myself. I knew it was different and I didn't know how, and it was bothering me. So I used to spend a lot of time trying to catch up on school and trying to get better, but then all my friends would just blow by me every single time, and then I just feel worse again. I used to spend a lot of time whenever I'd start writing, spend hours staring at a blank page, a blank screen. I felt like I just wasn't enjoying school. I was really trying my best, I just couldn't understand what was going on. I think I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to talk about it with other people as well.
In my school, they progressively got harder, and most of the class, understood one thing, and I was still stuck at 2 weeks ago, I still don't understand this. That was definitely a difficult situation that I was in constantly, and I didn't feel what my teachers were saying made sense. Everyone around me understood it and got it super quick, and I was just kind of left in the dust. I felt very lonely. I was completely terrified of being called on because I just couldn't read what was on the screen, and that was the same with math. I just couldn't read numbers, and no one really took the time to describe it to me or help me understand it better. I didn't feel like I actually was learning. It was very difficult to actually want to learn and understand it more.
There was a joy and innocence to my childhood self where I didn't know why things were hard, and I was still willing to kind of throw myself against the wall because I loved people and I loved connecting in spite of all the challenges. Up until 6th and 7th grade, I was routinely not understanding sarcastic jokes, misreading facial, verbal cues, vocal inflection. I used to have relatively frequent meltdowns. The experience of just overload and not having any control over your body. When I was in kindergarten, all the kids were playing tag. One of the things I've always been very good at is kind of learning, observing, identifying social rules and norms and trying to assimilate. And I picked up on very early on that the cool kids, as they call it, played tag. So all I wanted to do was play the game with them. But for reasons I did not yet understand, the way I portrayed myself socially set me apart as, if not unlikable, certainly not like the rest. So they didn't really want me in that group. They were like, okay, you can play, but you have to be it. You have to be the one chasing. No one wanted to be the one chasing. But I was so thrilled to just be part of the game and be part of the group that I was gladly chasing every single time. They're running away from me, but I'm chasing after them, and I was happy about it.
The reality is that so many people go undiagnosed for years, not getting evaluated until adulthood, or just not at all. I was lucky enough to get diagnosed in the 7th grade, but even then I had struggled for years to keep up with all my peers. I was seemingly doing fine in all my classes, but behind the scenes I was overworking myself at a rate that was just not sustainable.
Kids fly under the radar because they're terrified. They come in, they have an undiagnosed learning difference, and they think something's wrong with them, that they're secretly stupid, so they cower and hide.
Teachers are really good at flagging severe learning issues. I mean, if a kid is far enough behind, they get flagged. But all the kids in the middle, between not severely disabled and totally typical learners, which is a lot of people, it's a crapshoot.
I knew I was having challenges, but it was one of those things where I was in a lot of spaces where it was you don't talk about whatever challenges you have. You got to figure it out on your own. My parents also noticed I was having challenges with things. I tended to do very well in school, which is part of why my teachers did not see any sort of challenge with me, because they were like, what's going on? Like, she's liked by her classmates, she's not having trouble with like schoolwork or anything, so what is going on?
And there's a good chunk of people in that gray zone. The nature of their learning or processing differences aren't super severe. And so therefore, there's nothing extreme happening that really stands out to teachers or to parents or whatnot.
What they do is they work endless hours to overcompensate. They do all this stuff that is stressing them out in an effort to pretend there's nothing wrong.
One of the things my parents talk about is like, I do so much extra work for the small result.
Right? And so you can have really strong abstract reasoning skills and a learning disability, and one kind of masks the other.
I have a really terrible short-term memory, but my long-term memory and my pattern recognition are really strong. And so I would use those two skills to mask the working memory issue. I had trouble learning how to read. I'd take my books home that I had reading tests on, I would have my parents read them to me. I would memorize the words on the page and the pictures associated with those words, and then I would recite the words back during my reading test.
Those kids fly under the radar because the end product is that, hey, he understands what he reads really well. No one's analyzing the process or evaluating or considering the process by which the student got to that point of understanding.
There have been times I've like flown under the radar just because people don't see the amount of time that you put into your homework. So I used to spend a lot of time just trying to like pass by and not get noticed instead of like asking for help when I needed it. I'd like spend so much time avoiding that like confrontation from my teacher of them being like, you don't know how to do really basic math, instead of like admitting the fact that I was struggling with it.
You'll see differences between kids who are in a public school system versus a private school system. So the public school mission is to educate kids to grade level. So they take very little account or really don't care about whether you're a smart kid and could be achieving more. If you're at grade level, you're good enough.
For me, in a public school where it's one teacher and there's 30 kids, for them to individually focus on every kid and their needs. And so that's why a lot of times, like, a kid like me who was doing fine just was able to like completely fly under the radar for whatever 16 years. And the other thing too is I didn't necessarily know how to self-advocate at that point. And that's why it was so easy for me to just like be brushed aside in terms of like, okay, she's fine.
I think I was very left behind. I wouldn't be able to finish lots of stuff, and I would have to just move on to the next thing without actually understanding what I was doing.
Everybody thinks it's just them, and they blame themselves constantly.
I don't think I really understood what learning differences were because no one really talked about them. No one really talked about it, so I just thought that like, oh, I'm just not learning this and it's my fault.
Then I got tested. I was finally diagnosed with dyslexia and an attention deficit. While this diagnosis gave me answers to my questions, it didn't solve all my problems. It took me years to learn various learning strategies that help me navigate through my challenges, some of which I'm still working on to this day. Most importantly, it took me time to understand how I learn and how to be the best self-advocate possible. I grew to love my brain and my neurodiversity.
So the aim of the evaluation process is to detail both what a person's strengths are and what a person's weaknesses are.
You just want to find out how your brain thinks. It's like challenging the brain to think in different ways.
It centers on cognitive processing skills, things like attention and concentration.
You're doing like puzzles, you're reading stuff,
Memory, how quickly the brain works.
you're writing stuff, you're explaining stuff.
Cognitive organization, language processing, stuff like that.
Little weird tests, each of which shines a narrow beam light on one way that your brain makes sense of the world.
To use all of those different bits and pieces to try to understand a person's profile, if you will, their pattern of strengths and weaknesses.
You put all those scores together and you essentially get a map of how you learn. Until you have that map, you're like moving through your education, running your head into glass walls. It's so profound to understand what's going on. I can think of so many students who spent years thinking they were secretly stupid. Like, that is almost a universal experience for people who are diagnosed fairly late in life.
Finally get diagnosed my junior year, and like it was this like explosion of like, oh my gosh, this makes so much sense and I'm not stupid. The things that I had been describing to Miss Montgomery, to my parents, it was so validating to get that diagnosis, because I was like, holy crap. So I'm not the problem. And so I remember just kind of sitting down and being like, okay, now what the heck do I do with this information? And so it ended up being like, there was a lot of working. I definitely will say I had to put in probably more work than your average student. I just remember that was finally okay, now I can figure things out.
I found out that I was neurodiverse when I was about 10. When I found out, a lot of things made sense. After I got my learning profile back, I really was able to take the information that was given to me about how I learned and apply it into what I need to do in order to learn better. I got a lot more help from people. In the first couple of months, I really started making really large improvements and really higher and higher jumps in my learning. I was really trying in school, I was doing better, there was a lot of improvement. Went from being really, really confused in class to finally understanding what to do and how to get the help that I needed, and I had a lot of support from everybody around me too.
After being diagnosed with dyslexia, my parents and I started looking at dyslexic schools that would help. The teachers were very helpful, and it was kind of I almost belong here. I was a lot more confident in my work, and I was around people that had the same learning difference, so I actually, instead of flying under the radar, I really flew above. Finally, I didn't feel misplaced.
I was first diagnosed when I was 10. My mom sat me down. She was like, so honey, you have ADHD. I felt like my brain was just kind of this thing that was not at all helpful and was hurting me more than helping me. And I started actually looking into things and doing a lot of metacognition, and had a chance to try things and see what worked for me, that I was okay, maybe I should give my learning and my brain and my way of thinking a chance.
There is so much stigma that exists around neurodiversity, causing individuals to hide or mask who they are. Getting diagnosed is a big challenge in and of itself, but oftentimes learning to navigate the world with it is harder.
A lot of autistic people describe joy and relief upon finding out. For me, I feel like it was a profound loss of childhood innocence. I was not a different person tangibly. I woke up the next morning with the same cells as I had the previous day. But from that point on, the word autism, the moment that word not just entered my mind, but entered my identity, it became a very sad life in a lot of ways, because I was no longer just trying to run towards people I liked. I was trying to run away from a word that was threatening to gobble me up. I saw autism as, you can't really make friends. So I'm like, okay, I will judge my entire self-worth on my ability to make friends. High school, I played basketball way longer than I probably should have. I saw basketball as this normative, social high school experience that boys do. And I'm like, if I play basketball, maybe I'll be less autistic.
There is a lot of stigma out there around it. I definitely have worked with parents that are concerned about whether I will apply a label to their child or not. I'll have students who will go to a boarding school, for example, or who will move out of state, and their parents are running into real difficulty getting their kid accommodations, because schools will flat out say, we don't deal with kids with learning disabilities.
I was deeply ashamed to have an ADHD diagnosis. The stigma at my school was very much a thing of ADHD and neurodiversity, that's not good, you have a problem. I didn't feel like I could show how much I was struggling. One of the challenges with my ADHD is I have very severe sensory sensitivities. The world is too bright, too loud, too much movement. It is a lot. There was a lot of stigma around the fact that I had to wear headphones all the time. You see my headphones now, I need sunglasses, I wear gloves. There's a whole bunch of stuff in my life that I just need in order to get through the day.
I actually remember little comments that people would make, not in a mean way. I know it wasn't meant to be malicious, but were really hurtful.
Oh, you're so weird. Oh, you're just not very smart.
Oh, it took you 3 hours to do that? Well, it only took me 30 minutes.
There was a part of me that was kind of scared to get a diagnosis because as relieving as it was also like, okay, there is something wrong. And so I think that I had to kind of switch my brain from being like, okay, there is something wrong to no, there's not something wrong, there's something different, and different is fine.
If you realize how common it is for people to have neurodiversity, and if you understand that neurodiversity is about how your brain functions, it takes the sting out of it. And you're like, oh, well, that's not my fault. It used to be like learning disabilities, but to be honest, my students are not disabled. And I don't think anybody is truly learning disabled if they are given the support that they need.
They think that people who have learning differences are like dumb. And that's not the case. We just don't think the same way. It causes people to like hide their learning differences because they don't want to be marked in like that different group of people just because of the way they think.
I suffered not because being autistic is a bad thing, but because when I found out, I was competing with Rain Man and I was trying to win. People assume that one portrayal of a disability or condition, whether neurodiversity or otherwise, is the portrayal. So I don't really have an issue with the movie Rain Man. I have an issue with the way the public's perceived it. It should be just one part of the spectrum, but people have made it to be the whole condition. One of the misconceptions about autism and autistic people is that we are antisocial, that we don't like people, that we don't feel. If anything, it's the opposite. We have a strong capacity to feel and empathize and emote given the right circumstances. All humans have a desire to connect.
There is so much change that needs to happen in the way our world responds to neurodiversity. We need to normalize that learning can look different for every person. We need to make accommodations more accessible. We need to educate teachers on how to make the classroom environment more inclusive for all learners. We need to be talking about neurodiversity more.
Thinking about thinking is a powerful tool. It's the greatest gift you can get to understand how your brain works. Because then the sky is the limit. You can do anything you want if you understand why some things don't work.
I think every human in our society has the right to learn, and education is a fundamental right, and that education should work for everyone's brain. It is your right to have an education that works for you.
If we're going to be educators, we owe it to students to find out what they really need and provide it for them.
Unfortunately, society kind of hasn't caught up with that. Teachers aren't paid enough. There aren't enough access to resources for students, especially in places where the funding isn't great. Self-advocacy is so important, and sometimes people can't advocate for themselves, and that's where other people need to come in. We need to be talking about this stuff, because if the stigma continues, we're gonna keep having these same cycles where people who are completely normal and awesome and weird and funky and cool, normal people, right, are feeling lonely and lost.
I wish people appreciated that having a learning difference or a learning disability does not mean there's something wrong with you. Variability is inherent and endemic in the human population. I wish neuropsych evaluation were a more accessible process. I wish it were something that everybody could go through. I mean, I literally say to parents sometimes, and I mean it, it is a process that every student would find value in. I wish it were more accessible.
I wish everybody understood how they learned. In my dream world, everybody would get testing to tell them how they learned, so that everybody would have essentially the roadmap of why learning is sometimes challenging for them. Classes of no more than 16 at any time. I would want teachers to be really well trained. I would want everybody to have a really delightful environment in which to learn with all the resources they need.
1 in 5 people are neurodiverse. Why are we talking about it all the time? I just wish everyone had access to the kind of testing that I did. It was life-changing for me. I mean, when I tell you it was life-changing, it really was. There are people that don't have access to being able to get tested. It's expensive, it's hard to find a person to do it, and not everyone is in that kind of place to be able to get a diagnosis or even know to get a diagnosis.
I think it could have been talked about more. It is kind of a common thing. People could kind of recognize she's having trouble with this. We should learn more about it instead of ignoring it.
The ability to access accommodations, I think, has to be a lot easier, more streamlined, and easily accessible. High school students, college students, people who are neurodivergent, they have to seek accommodations out on their own. I think if people actually took a second to learn about what autism, ADHD, dyslexia, any neurodiverse identities are, to speak to people, to hear the perspectives of people who've had it, if we just bridge that gap, allowed people to actually consider whether they might be neurodivergent just as a part of growing up, then people would get diagnosed more and get more help and be better able to succeed anyways.
The idea of universal design learning is that schools need to, and the education system in general needs to recognize the artificial parameters that have been placed around learning, to try to sort of build as much flexibility into how school is both delivered and how you demonstrate knowledge and understanding as possible. It's not that we need to change the system just for some people. We need to make the system more flexible so that we no longer have to split hairs between who has a learning disability and who doesn't. It's just flexible for everybody. Why is it that you have to read a print book? Why isn't it just as acceptable to listen to an audiobook?
Why not make classrooms just more accessible? Why not, make it so that every student, whether or not they have a diagnosis, can thrive in a learning environment? Because that just makes sense.
I wish people knew that at its core, neurodiversity is just a set of words that describe a set of symptoms that can allow people clarity on how they live their life. I wish an autism diagnosis doesn't threaten people's sense of self because they don't see anyone around them representing autism in a way that they could relate to. I wish that an ADHD diagnosis wouldn't threaten parents' ideas of their children's successes. I wish people didn't see neurodiversity and disabilities as an excuse. So part of what I want to do eventually when I'm actually able to get off my butt and do the advocacy I want to do is do work on redefining the word autism.
Our world gets caught up in the debilitative aspects of neurodiversity. There is a whole other side to neurodiversity that goes untalked about. Neurodiversity can help individuals uniquely see and navigate the world.
I am able to hyper-focus on topics of interest to me and assimilate information on it incredibly quickly. I can still name certain basketball statistics from 2006 and the entirety of the Star Wars timeline from the top of my head, if I wanted. One of our most common symptoms is hyper-empathy, just in general. And I think I'm naturally inquisitive and I question norms because I've had to kind of learn everything from scratch. And then also I'm really proud of my ability to communicate. I think that has a lot of ability to help me advocate for neurodivergent community and anyone else.
I can give people the benefit of the doubt. I have a lot of experience with seeing a kid who was struggling and then going, okay, well, maybe it's not like a behavioral difference. They might be really struggling, and being able to give like a kid or an adult or just a general person like that chance to really see and grow. And I think that's a huge advantage. I love the fact that I don't see things one way, ever. Being able to see things from like 5 or 6 different perspectives at the same time is really nice.
Something is explained to me from a teacher, I can probably put it in 7 different ways and explain it to 7 different people for their learning style that will work for them. It will take me a second longer. I will not be able to get you the answer in 30 seconds like some of my peers will be able to, but like I can twist it and explain it to people 7 different ways just because that's how my brain checks things.
I like that my brain is different than other people's brains.
As a society, we need to work harder at discovering these differences. Everyone can benefit from learning about the way their brain functions, what their strengths are, and what they need to work harder at. We just haven't caught up to how essential this is.
Neurodiversity is an axis of diversity. So it's just another identifier that helps us determine who we are in the world. If there are elements of a culture or a community which are different from each other, that adds depth and complexity, and it adds creativity, and it adds all kinds of really fabulous qualities to a community.
I think a lot of times we think about like stigma and like learning differences or these terrible things that like hamper a child, but they don't necessarily have to be the defining factor in your life. I wouldn't say I love my learning difference, but I wouldn't say I dislike it either, at least not most of the time. It's just there. I feel comfortable with it.
And it's a part of me that kind of makes me me almost. And I take pride in being dyslexic now that I understand and can work with it.
It's really important to ask people for help when you need it, to like know that other people are experiencing the same thing as me and that like it's not just me and that I'm not alone. Makes me really like relieved in a way.
Be patient with yourself, and you don't think the same way as others. You are different, but you can use that to your advantage. It doesn't make you like weird or not smart. It just means that you need a different kind of help than other people do, and so you should get that.
I started to see that I'm not too much. Like, my needs are valid, my needs can be supported and should be supported. It's not so much that I'm too much, it's more that the world is a lot, and I deserve to have space and time and support to move through it.
The progress that has been made over the last like 30 years is immense. It's absolutely colossal. And so even though there are lots of things that are still frustrating and there's still lots of stigma and we still live in this world of you do or you don't have one, it's so much more normalized to talk about learning differences, neurodiversity now.
I was often in spaces where like needing accommodations and needing extra support was like, oh my gosh, like it's Alex again, she needs extra support, like oh my gosh. But I have come to realize that like my brain is awesome and needing extra support is not a bad thing, it's just a thing. Just because I need that extra support doesn't mean that I can't succeed, that I can't go far, that I can do really amazing things. And some of those amazing things happen just because I have that extra support to succeed.
We have to stop acting like neurodiversity is a burden. It adds value to our communities. Neurodiversity brings a whole new set of different thinkers to the table. And this difference is essential. This difference is a strength.